the night air of Grasse, the perfume capital of France, hung heavy with the scent of crushed jasmine and something far more sinister. Bitter almond, drifting like a ghost through the manicured gardens of Maison Verdue. At the heart of the courtyard lay Colette Marchand, Europe's most celebrated perfumer, collapsed beside a shattered vial, glowing like amber fire in the moonlight. As her final breath dissolved into the perfumed wind, a single question echoed across the estate. Who would kill the woman whose creations enchanted the world? Chapter 1. The Scent of Death. The dawn broke slowly over the hills of Grasse, painting the sky with bruised shades of lavender and rose, as though the heavens themselves mourned the tragedy that had unfolded hours earlier. The air, usually sweet with the perfume of sprawling flower fields, carried a heaviness. A strange, metallic stillness disturbed only when the wind swept across the jasmine vines and stirred the lingering scent that refused to dissipate. It was the fragrance that now haunted Maison Verdue, a haunting blend of jasmine, amber, and something far more sinister. Bitter almond, sharp enough to sting the senses and whisper of poison. The estate itself was a grand ivory-coloured mansion, perched proudly atop a gentle hill, its balconies overlooking lush fields cultivated for some of the world's most precious fragrances. But on this morning, the place seemed stripped of its elegance. The shutters hung half open, some swaying slightly. The marble courtyard, usually the site of lavish gatherings hosted by the famed perfumer Colette Marchand, now stood desolate, cordoned off by the local police. Officers moved about with subdued urgency, their faces tight, their boots crunching lightly over gravel paths. At the centre of the courtyard, hours before the body had been transported, Colette Marchand had collapsed. Her body had been found beside a shattered vial that glimmered under the moonlight like a fallen jewel. The glass fragments had caught the last traces of candlelight from her laboratory windows, sparkling grotesquely around her lifeless form. Even now, faint traces of the liquid remained on the stones, a deep amber stain that clung to the cracks as though unwilling to follow her into death. It was into this tense and uneasy atmosphere that Hercule Poirot arrived. He stepped out of the sleek black car with the deliberate grace of a man who believed in order, symmetry, and precision even in moments of chaos. His immaculate grey suit contrasted the soft pastels of the morning, and his black moustache, reflectively polished as always, stood proudly, defying even the wind. Poirot paused at the entrance of the courtyard, removing his gloves carefully, folding them precisely, then placing them in his coat pocket. His eyes swept the scene with meticulous attention, absorbing every detail. The disturbed gravel, the faint shoe prints, some purposeful, some chaotic, the partially wilted petals on the rose arch, and the peculiar way the sunlight illuminated the stained stones. Inspector Fontaine approached him hurriedly, his stride brisk, his face flushed with sleeplessness and frustration. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, offering a stiff bow. "Thank you for arriving so promptly. We have a delicate situation." Poirot raised a single eyebrow in polite inquiry. "Ah, a delicate situation is often the polite French way of saying a catastrophe, is it not?" he said softly, hands clasped behind him. "But tell me, my friend, what has happened?" Fontaine exhaled sharply and gestured to the courtyard. "Colette Marchand, dead, found by one of the maids at around midnight. No witnesses. The vial you see has been confirmed to contain traces of cyanide." Poirot's gaze drifted to the fragments of amber glass. He stepped forward, his polished shoes making no sound. He crouched carefully, lowering himself with surprising agility for a man of his age. He leaned close, never touching, merely observing. He closed his eyes, inhaled lightly, and the faint but unmistakable bitterness carried itself to him. "Cyanide," he murmured, "but masked in jasmine. A perfume to conceal a poison. How ironic for a perfumer to meet her end by a fragrance." Fontaine folded his arms. Could it have been suicide? The woman was under pressure. Finances unstable. Rumours of personal conflicts. Poirot stood and dusted one knee of his trousers delicately. "Suicide, my dear Inspector, rarely involves such artistry. And suicide rarely chooses a courtyard, where the body will be discovered in dramatic fashion. No." His eyes hardened. "This, I suspect, is murder." Fontaine nodded reluctantly. Poirot took a slow walk along the edge of the courtyard, noting the tracks in the dew-covered grass. "Tell me," he said, "who is in the house?" "4 individuals closely tied to the victim," Fontaine replied. "Her partner in business, Lucien Verdoux, her apprentice, Sabine Leclerc, a rival perfumer, Etienne Morel, and Madame Giselle Montfort, a long-time patron." Poirot listened carefully. "All to be questioned, yes. But first, I would like to see where she worked. The laboratory." Fontaine hesitated. "The place is chaotic. Broken glass, overturned books, scattered notes. As though she was searching for something, or someone else was." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Then it is precisely where we must begin." They walked together through a narrow passageway that led indoors. The elegant marble floors contrasted with the chaos inside the laboratory. Here, the heart of Colette Marchand's genius lay in ruin. Vials of rare essential oils lined the shelves, though some had toppled. Perfume strips were scattered like fallen feathers. A large work table, covered in stains and handwritten notes, dominated the room, its surface littered with pipettes, metal clamps, and small crystals of resins. Poirot moved slowly, running his dazed fingertips over surfaces, not touching evidence, but sensing the energy of the room. "She was interrupted," he said softly. "She was working. Something startled her. Someone entered unexpectedly." Fontaine frowned. "How can you tell?" Poirot pointed at a row of scent strips pinned neatly to a corkboard. One had been ripped off in haste, the pin still hanging loosely. "The perfectionist never leaves such disorder, unless forced." Poirot bent to inspect a small notebook lying half under the table. It was filled with Colette's elegant handwriting, formula drafts, ingredient ratios, fragrance layers. But one page had been violently torn out, leaving jagged remnants along the binding. "Missing?" Poirot murmured. "Perhaps the killer took it," Fontaine suggested. "Yes, or perhaps the killer wished to destroy the evidence of inspiration or theft." Poirot's eyes drifted to a small vial on the corner of the table, unbroken, sealed tightly. It held a golden liquid identical to the one found shattered in the courtyard. Poirot lifted it gently by its cork edge, using a cloth, examining it closely. "Another of the same formula," he observed, "but the scent inside does not match her usual style." Fontaine blinked. "You can tell without opening it?" Poirot smiled modestly. "Of course, I am Hercule Poirot." Before they could examine further, a sharp crashing sound echoed down the hallway. A cabinet toppled, glass shattering. Fontaine cursed and rushed toward the noise. Poirot followed calmly. They found Sabine Leclerc, Colette's young apprentice, standing amidst the chaos of a fallen storage cabinet. Her face was pale, her breath coming in panicked gasps, a notebook clutched tightly to her chest. She looked like a fragile porcelain doll shaken too abruptly. I didn't mean to break anything," she whispered. "I was only looking for my sketchbook." Poirot stepped closer, studying her trembling hands. A delicate scent clung to her fingertips, fresh jasmine, untainted by bitterness, very similar to the scent of the shattered vial. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began gently, "why is your sketchbook hidden behind chemicals in a locked storage shelf?" Sabine froze, her eyes darting between them. "Colette said I wasn't ready. She said I lacked originality. She wouldn't even look at my work anymore. Is that why you came here, after hours?" Sabine swallowed hard. "I only wanted to retrieve my things," she insisted. "I didn't kill her. I swear on my life." Poirot observed her closely, not just her words, but the way she pressed her sketchbook to her chest, as though shielding it from the world, the way her breath hitched whenever Colette's name was spoken, the glistening fear in her eyes not only of being accused, but of being exposed. Before he could question her further, heavy footsteps approached. Lucien Verdoux, Colette's business partner, emerged from the hallway, towering in stature, his face etched with grief and anger. He had the lean build of a man used to long hours and little rest, and the half-crushed cigarette in his fingers smouldered with restrained fury. "What is going on here?" he demanded. "Sabine, what have you done now?" Sabine flinched, shrinking back. Poirot raised a hand. "Monsieur Verdoux, please, Mademoiselle Leclerc is merely recovering her belongings." Lucien scoffed. She was always rummaging where she didn't belong. Poirot tilted his head. "An interesting accusation, given the state of your partnership with Mademoiselle Marchand." Lucien stiffened. Fontaine stepped forward. "We will speak with each of you, but separately." Lucien muttered something under his breath and stormed out, leaving a trail of smoke in his wake. Sabine's shoulders slumped. "He hated me," she whispered. "He hated anyone Colette admired." Poirot filed the statement away silently. Another voice interrupted their thoughts, silky, cold. "I suppose the great detective has arrived to solve what the local police cannot." They turned to see Etienne Morel, Colette's rival in the perfume world. He stepped into the laboratory with the poise of a man accustomed to attention. His dark coat contrasted with the paler tones of the room, and his eyes, sharp as knives, flicked from the shattered cabinet to the vial in Poirot's hand. "You'll find," Etienne said dryly, "that Colette made many enemies." Poirot approached him calmly. "And yet you still came. Why?" A smirk touched Etienne's lips. "Because somebody sent me a letter yesterday, signed by Colette. She claimed she had proof that would ruin me forever, proof she intended to reveal publicly." "And did she have such proof?" Poirot asked softly. Etienne's smirk vanished. "No, because the letter was forged." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "You are certain?" "I knew her handwriting better than I knew my own," Etienne said, "and that letter, though convincing, was wrong, too stiff, too formal." Poirot studied him a moment longer before stepping back. The net widened, motives multiplied, lies thickened like the layered fragrance of a complex perfume. As the morning advanced further, Poirot returned to the courtyard alone. Sunlight now cast long beams across the stones, illuminating the faint smear where Colette had fallen. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, this time without caution. Jasmine, amber, almond, fear, betrayal, and something else, something hidden beneath the overt scents. Poirot's mind hummed in silent calculation. A murder was like a fragrance, each note layered intentionally, each element serving a purpose, each lie masking another truth. Someone here had composed this tragedy, and Hercule Poirot would unmask them all. But before he could return indoors, a sudden scream echoed from the garden, sharp and terrified. A maid rushed into view, her face, chalk white, pointing toward the rose arch. "Monsieur Poirot," she cried, "there is something. You must see." Poirot strode forward, and there beneath the archway, half hidden in the dewy grass, lay a silk handkerchief, embroidered with elegant gold threading. And the initials? G.M. Madame Giselle Montfort. Poirot bent slowly to lift the handkerchief with gloved fingers. Another scent lingered upon it, rosewater and fear. The morning sun brightened, but the mystery deepened. Poirot straightened, holding the handkerchief lightly. "The plot," he whispered, "has begun to thicken like a perfume settling into the skin." And somewhere inside this house of fragrance and secrets, a killer waited. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Flowers. The morning sun had risen high enough for its warmth to touch the vast gardens of Maison Verdoux, warming the petals of roses and stretching shadows into long, trembling lines across the cobblestone paths. Yet, despite the tranquil beauty of the estate grounds, an almost suffocating tension clung to the air. The birdsong felt hesitant, the breeze unnatural, as though the estate itself was holding its breath, awaiting Hercule Poirot's next move. The handkerchief discovered beneath the rose arch lay on a silver platter now, handled only with gloves, its embroidered initials gleaming in gold. G.M. Giselle Montfort. But evidence, Poirot reminded himself, was not always what it appeared to be. Handkerchiefs could be planted, scents manipulated, and truths disguised just as easily as perfume formulas could be altered. Poirot walked slowly through the garden, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the dew-softened earth. His eyes scanned every detail. The broken stems of a rose bush, the faint impression of a heel in the soil, the way the silk handkerchief had been partially tucked beneath a cluster of fallen petals. Someone had knelt here. Someone had placed it, or someone had dropped it in haste. He leaned closer, narrowing his eyes at faint fibres tangled among the rose thorns, threads of pale gold, barely visible unless one knew where to look. The handkerchief had snagged here before being released. He nodded to himself, filing the observation away. Inspector Fontaine approached from behind, his coat flapping slightly in the crisp morning wind. "Poirot," he said, stopping beside him. "The suspects are gathered in the drawing-room. Tension is mounting." Poirot did not turn immediately. He let his gaze drift across the field of lavender stretching beyond the garden walls. "When suspicion is thrown into a group lacking unity," he murmured, "it festers, it grows. Soon people begin to reveal more truth in their fear than they would in their calm." Fontaine frowned. "You mean to say the pressure will help them crack?" Poirot finally turned, his moustache twitching with faint amusement. "Mon ami, I did not say crack. I said reveal. Human nature is a fragrance. You merely need to know how to inhale it." Together they walked toward the mansion, descending the stone steps leading into the main hall. The atmosphere inside felt vastly different from the open air, tighter, heavier. Every window was drawn only halfway, letting slanted beams of light cut across the polished floors. Staff hurried quietly from room to room, careful not to disturb the silence. Whispered rumours clung to corners like dust. The drawing-room doors stood open, revealing the four main suspects, seated tensely across from one another. Lucien Verdoux stood near the fireplace, arms crossed tightly across his chest, his jaw set in stone. His eyes darted toward Poirot with visible irritation. Sabine Leclerc sat at the far corner, her hands wrapped around a teacup she did not drink from, her eyes red with sleeplessness. Etienne Morel lounged in a velvet chair with a kind of calculated arrogance, cleaning his fingernails with a silver instrument, as though entirely unbothered by the gravity of the situation. And finally, Madame Giselle Montfort sat elegantly on the chaise near the window, adorned in pearls and soft pastels, her expression unreadable. Poirot entered with a calm but commanding presence. "Mesdames, Messieurs," he began softly, "thank you for gathering. I must ask for your patience, as this investigation will require delicacy." Lucien scoffed loudly. "Delicacy? A woman is dead, Poirot. Colette is gone. What we need is action." Poirot looked at him steadily. "Action without understanding leads only to chaos, Monsieur Verdoux. And chaos," he said pointedly, "benefits only the guilty." Lucien stiffened but said nothing. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and began pacing slowly. "Last night, tragedy struck in the courtyard. Colette Marchand, a visionary in her craft, was poisoned using a fragrance she had been developing. Now poison is a curious thing. It requires planning, intention, knowledge, and above all, access." His eyes flicked to each suspect in turn. "All of you had such access." Sabine swallowed visibly. Etienne smirked. Giselle's fingers tightened around her fan. Lucien glared at the floor. Poirot began with Sabine. "Mademoiselle Leclerc," he said in a gentle tone, "you were found in the storage cabinet earlier, searching for your sketchbook. Might I ask why it was hidden there, and not in your room?" Sabine's voice trembled. "Colette confiscated it 2 days ago. She said I was becoming too reliant on her formulas, not developing my own style. She wanted me to start from scratch. Did that anger you?" She looked up sharply, shaking her head. "No. Well, yes, but not enough to kill her. I admired her. She was everything I wanted to be." Poirot tilted his head. "Admiration, mademoiselle, can become obsession. Sometimes love sharpens into resentment when expectations are not met. But I do not accuse. You merely give voice to your emotions." Sabine's eyes lowered again. Poirot shifted next to Lucien Verdoux. "Monsieur Verdoux, you were her partner in business, yes? And you argued with her yesterday afternoon." Lucien's eyes narrowed dangerously. "So the servants have been talking." Poirot did not blink. "Is it true?" Lucien exhaled sharply. "Yes, we argued. Colette wanted to change the direction of our next production line. She wanted to risk everything we built to chase something extraordinary. Some new formula, she claimed, would change the world of perfumery." He shook his head bitterly. "She didn't understand finances. We were drowning in debt." Poirot paused. "Debt is a powerful motive, monsieur." Lucien slammed his fist lightly against the fireplace mantel. "If I wanted her dead, I would not have poisoned her in the courtyard like some criminal imbecile. I would have let the business collapse and walked away with what dignity remains." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "An interesting statement, monsieur, but you forget. Anger clouds logic, and last night you were very angry indeed." Before Lucien could respond, Poirot turned to Etienne Morel, who was twirling his silver instrument lazily between his fingers. "Monsieur Morel," Poirot said, "you received a letter from Colette yesterday, or so you claim." Etienne smirked. "I did, and it was false. I have nothing to hide, detective. Yes, Colette despised me. Yes, she believed I stole her ideas. Yes, I may have borrowed inspiration from her work from time to time. But poison? Murder? I'm a perfumer. I create beauty, not death." Poirot smiled faintly. "Beauty and death, monsieur, often share more ingredients than you think." Etienne's expression tightened. Finally, Poirot approached Giselle Montfort. She held her head high, but her fingers trembled faintly as they played with her silk fan. "Madame Montfort," Poirot said gently, "your handkerchief was found in the garden, near the location of the crime." A hush fell over the room. Giselle lifted her chin. "Then someone placed it there. I was in my room last night. I suffer from insomnia. I did not leave until dawn." Poirot stepped a bit closer. "Is that so, madame? And yet the earth beneath the handkerchief showed signs of someone kneeling, someone with a delicate step, someone wearing shoes no larger than—" He glanced down at her elegant heels. Giselle's lips tightened. "You dare imply—" "I imply nothing yet," Poirot interrupted smoothly. "But a handkerchief is a symbol, a signature even. Anyone could have used it to frame you." Etienne chuckled darkly. "And who would want to frame you, Giselle? Unless, of course, you had a secret worth hiding." Giselle turned sharply toward him. "I have no secrets. Everyone has secrets." Etienne leaned back, crossing his legs. "Especially wealthy patrons who spent more time with Colette than they admit." Poirot watched them with interest. "Enough," he said gently. "I will speak to each of you separately. For now, you may rest, but do not leave the estate." He left the room before arguments could erupt again. Poirot walked alone through the silent corridor, his mind alive with inference. Already the characters of this tragedy were revealing themselves, but the truth, like a rare fragrance, was hidden in the smallest note, the faintest trace. He entered Colette's private greenhouse next, a glass-walled room overflowing with exotic plants. The warm air inside was thick with scent, ylang-ylang, osmanthus rosewood. And there, on a small wooden table, Poirot found something curious. A series of dried flowers arranged in a meticulous pattern, each tagged with a date. But the tag for the previous night, Le 14 Avril, was missing entirely. Poirot leaned closer. A flower had indeed been removed. "What were you hiding, mademoiselle?" he whispered. Suddenly, footsteps approached behind him. He turned to see Sabine Leclerc standing timidly at the greenhouse entrance, wringing her hands. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "there's something I must tell you. Something important." Poirot stepped closer. "Go on, mademoiselle." She looked around fearfully. Colette. She was working on something new, something she kept secret even from Lucien. A formula she said would change the art forever. But she trusted me with one thing, only me. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And what was that? Sabine reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. Her hands shook as she offered it to him. "She asked me to hide this," Sabine whispered. "Hide it in case something happened to her." Poirot unfolded the paper carefully. On it was a list of ingredients, rare, expensive, powerful. But one ingredient had been circled 3 times in thick black ink. L'amandine noire, forbidden extract. Poirot inhaled slowly. The forbidden almond oil, banned in France for its unstable and toxic properties. And yet somehow, it had found its way into Colette's new fragrance. "Merci, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly. "You have been most helpful." Sabine bowed her head and turned to leave. But just as she reached the door, Poirot added, "One more thing, mademoiselle. Last night, where were you at the hour of Colette's death?" Sabine froze. I was in my room," she said, "sketching. I did not hear anything." Poirot nodded, but his mind noted the hesitation in her voice. He left the greenhouse and walked back into the estate's inner courtyard. The sunlight was warmer now, but the shadows were longer, stretched, distorted, like secrets resisting exposure. Poirot paused beside the stained stones where Colette had died. He closed his eyes. The scent still lingered. Amber, jasmine, almond, and fear. Always fear. But now, there was something new. Something he had not noticed before. A faint trace of rosewater, like the one used by Madame Giselle Montfort. Poirot's eyes snapped open. Someone had been here after Colette fell. Someone who knelt beside her. Perhaps to check for a pulse. Perhaps to whisper final words. Perhaps to retrieve something they feared she still held. Or to plant something. Poirot straightened his jacket. "Now," he whispered, "we begin to see the outline of the truth." But just as he began walking back toward the mansion, a loud shriek echoed from the second floor, sharp and frantic. Poirot broke into a swift stride. A maid rushed down the staircase, gasping for breath, pointing upward with trembling hands. "It's Monsieur Poirot! It's in the victim's bedroom! Someone has ransacked it!" Poirot's jaw tightened. The killer was not only among them, the killer was getting nervous, and that made them dangerous, very dangerous indeed. Chapter 3. The Scent That Lingers. The morning sun settled over Grasse like a thin veil of gold, yet for Hercule Poirot, the day felt heavy with unanswered questions. As he stepped into the courtyard of Villa-Marveaux, the air held a peculiar stillness, too quiet for a home recently touched by death. Benoit Lavigne, ever dutiful, had laid out breakfast beneath the arbour, though neither Poirot nor Inspector Duval seemed inclined to eat. The sweet scent of orange blossoms drifted across the table, but even that could not mask the bitter undertone of suspicion. Poirot surveyed the estate with his customary meticulous gaze, noting every detail. A tipped watering can in the corner, a broken sprig of lavender pressed into the stone path, and the faintest trace of footsteps near the side gate, overlapping, rushed, purposeful. Duval cleared his throat, trying futilely to appear unshaken. "The autopsy report arrived this morning," he said. "Madame Marveaux died of acute cardiac arrest, but the doctor confirms poisoning. A rare alkaloid, likely administered orally, perhaps in the perfume laboratory." Poirot inclined his head, unsurprised. The matter had already begun to arrange itself into patterns of structure. Too many passions, too many ambitions, too many grievances, wrapped in silk and secrecy. "Mon ami," Poirot replied softly, "we must examine the room where creativity and danger intertwine. The sanctum of the perfumer. The laboratory smelled of jasmine, sandalwood, and something faintly metallic. Rows of glass vials glittered in the sunlight, each labelled with precise handwriting. There were notebooks filled with formulae, blotting papers marked with half-tested accords, and a perfume organ arranged like the keys of an instrument waiting to be played. Poirot stepped inward with reverence and caution. A genius had worked here, but so too, perhaps, had a murderer. He touched nothing at first, simply allowing his senses to read the atmosphere. The faint scratch on the wooden counter, the nearly invisible smudge on the glass cabinet, and the one vial that seemed less dusty than the others, these were all clues whispering for recognition. He lifted a bottle, labelled Essence d'Hiver, Elise's upcoming fragrance, the one rumoured to be her masterpiece. "This formula," Poirot murmured, "is said to be revolutionary. A scent to change the world of perfumery. And what happens, Inspector, when something of such value exists? It attracts desire, jealousy, and danger." He noticed a second bottle of the same fragrance, but its stopper had been imperfectly replaced. Duval leaned forward. "You think the poison may have been introduced here?" Poirot tapped the bottle lightly. "Not this one, but the disorder tells us someone was in great haste." Their search was interrupted by the arrival of Lucien Delacroix, the charming yet volatile business partner of Elise's late husband. His expression held indignation as he entered, though his eyes betrayed anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot," Lucien said, "is it necessary to rifle through the work of a dead woman? She deserves dignity." Poirot met him with a polite but penetrating stare. "Dignity she shall have, monsieur. Justice is another matter. You had access to this room, n'est-ce pas?" Lucien stiffened. "I financed half of this enterprise. Of course I did, but that does not make me a killer." Poirot observed him keenly. The twitch in the jaw, the faint chemical burn on his sleeve, the contradiction between pride and fear. "Some partnerships," Poirot said gently, "are not built on harmony, but on necessity. And necessity, when threatened, can push a man to desperate acts." Lucien blanched, but said nothing further. After Lucien departed, Poirot's attention moved to Elise's personal notebook, lying open on the desk. The last entry was scrawled hurriedly. "He threatens everything, my work, my freedom. I cannot let him win." Poirot closed the book slowly, his mind racing. "She feared someone close," he said. Duval frowned. "Her husband, but he is dead." Poirot shook his head. "No, the verb is present. She writes of the living, not the past." This realization tightened the circle of suspects, Lucien certainly, but also Isabella, the high-strung niece who coveted her aunt's success, and Madame Moreau, the loyal yet possessive maid who treated Elise's genius as something almost sacred and therefore fragile. Poirot returned to the courtyard to interview Isabella Marveau, who arrived in a whirl of silk and irritation. Her eyes were red-rimmed, though not from sorrow. "I suppose you want to interrogate me next," she snapped. Poirot smiled gently. "Not interrogate, mademoiselle. Understand, for without understanding, one cannot see the full fragrance of truth." Isabella rolled her eyes but seated herself. "Fine, ask." Poirot began with simple questions. Her relationship with Elise, her ambitions, her activities yesterday. Isabella answered with biting candor. "She overshadowed me, always. I studied perfumery for years, but no one cared because Elise Marveau was the golden star of Grasse. Even her failures smelled like success." Her voice cracked with bitterness. Poirot folded his hands. "And yet you did not leave her side." Isabella's gaze darkened. "She owed me. For years, I created formulations she stole credit for." Poirot arched a brow. "You accuse a dead woman." Isabella leaned forward sharply. "I accuse the truth." Before he could question her further, a crash echoed from the hallway. Benoit had dropped a tray upon hearing Lucien's raised voice outside. Poirot excused himself and followed the source. Lucien was arguing violently with Madame Moreau, the maid, who clutched a folded letter in trembling hands. Poirot intervened calmly. "Perhaps we may discuss this without raised voices." Madame Moreau reluctantly handed Poirot the letter. Its contents were simple, yet alarming. "Meet me at the cypress grove tonight. I have proof of betrayal." It was unsigned, the handwriting disguised. Poirot studied the shape of the letters, the pressure of the strokes, their uneven slant. Someone had tried to mask their identity, but not well enough. "A rendezvous suggesting danger," he murmured, "or a trap." Madame Moreau insisted Elise had shown her the letter 2 nights before her death. "She was frightened," the maid said. "She asked me to stay close." Lucien scoffed. "You're lying to save yourself." Madame Moreau turned crimson. "I would have died before harming her." Poirot stepped between them, silencing the quarrel. "The truth, mes amis, has its own fragrance. It cannot be masked forever." As he returned toward the laboratory, a sudden gust of wind pushed the door open. Something glinted on the floor. A tiny shard of glass, almost invisible. Poirot knelt, picking it up gently. It was a fragment from a broken vial, the edges sharp, unclean, and stained faintly with a residue he recognized at once. A rare botanical compound used only in high-risk experimental formulas. He held the shard up to the light. "Ah," he whispered, "the murderer makes a mistake. A small one, but enough. A careless slip in a world where precision is everything." Duval entered behind him. "What does it mean?" Poirot smiled faintly. "It means, mon ami, that someone tampered not only with Elise's creations, but with her trust. And to uncover motive, we must uncover the thief." Yet even as he spoke, Poirot sensed the delicate threads of the mystery tightening. The perfumer's genius had crafted beauty, but someone had distilled death. And the answer lay not in grand gestures, but in the smallest trace of scent lingering where it did not belong. He straightened, narrowed his eyes, and with the calm certainty of a man who saw patterns where others saw chaos, he murmured, "We are close now, very close." Chapter 4. Whispers in the Cypress Grove. The afternoon deepened into a muted amber as Hercule Poirot made his way across the grounds of Villa Marveaux, his polished shoes crunching softly over gravel. Though the sun remained high, a chill threaded the air, carrying with it the resinous breath of the ancient cypress trees lining the estate's southern border. This was the place mentioned in the mysterious letter. "Meet me at the Cypress Grove tonight." Poirot paused beneath the towering trunks, each one casting long shadows like dark strokes upon a canvas of earth. There was no wind now, yet a faint rustling whispered through the branches, as if the grove held memories unwilling to remain silent. Poirot knelt and examined the soil. A patch had been disturbed recently, the marks shallow yet unmistakably the imprint of a heel, delicate, feminine, and no more than 24 hours old. "Madame Marveaux indeed came here," he murmured, "but did she meet someone, or did she flee from someone?" He traced the direction of the faint prints leading deeper into the grove, where the light dimmed into cool green, and bird calls fell quiet. Poirot emerged from the grove's cover to find Inspector Duval, waiting with an expression of reluctant admiration. "You wander like a bloodhound, Monsieur Poirot," Duval remarked. Poirot raised a finger. "No, no, mon ami. A bloodhound follows instinct. Poirot follows the order of things. A meeting was planned here, yet Madame Marveaux left no sign of return. That implies she was interrupted, or never arrived at all." Duval frowned. "But the maid swears Elise showed her the letter. Why would she lie?" Poirot walked past him slowly. "Fear, loyalty, confusion, these make for unreliable witnesses. But the earth, Inspector, it tells only the truth." Together they returned toward the villa, where Lucien Delacroix paced restlessly by the fountain, smoking with the aggression of a man in turmoil. His shoulders stiffened when he saw Poirot. "More accusations, I suppose?" Lucien snapped. Poirot offered a patient smile. "Non, monsieur, only questions." Lucien gestured irritably, flicking ash into the water. "Then ask and be done." Poirot circled him slowly, noting the faint smell of bitter greens on his coat, unmistakable to a trained nose. "Monsieur Delacroix," Poirot said softly, "your jacket carries the scent of Nerium oleander, a toxic plant growing only in the southern grove. Tell me, why were you there recently?" Lucien stiffened. For a fraction of a moment he hesitated. "Long enough. I walk there often, for peace." Poirot leaned closer. Peace, monsieur, or secrecy? Lucien's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. Before the tension could crack, Isabella Marveau burst from the veranda, her eyes wild and her breath unsteady. Where is Madame Moreau? The maid! I cannot find her anywhere! Poirot stiffened at once. Disappearances rarely followed innocence. He instructed Duval to search the villa, while he followed Isabella to the east wing. Her agitation was palpable, her heels tapping the marble floors like a nervous metronome. She's hiding something, I know she is, Isabella muttered. She worshipped my aunt to the point of obsession. Maybe she finally snapped. Poirot eyed her carefully. You speak with much certainty, for one who claims no involvement. Isabella stopped abruptly, turning with fury in her eyes. Because I'm tired of being treated like a suspect. I lost my aunt, my inheritance is in ruins, and now everyone whispers that I may be next. Poirot recognized the trembling beneath her anger. Fear, genuine fear, or a performance crafted with skill. They entered Elise's private sitting room, a space still scented faintly of bergamot and tea leaves. Poirot scanned the bookshelves, the scattered sketches, the half-finished letter lying under a paperweight shaped like a crystal rose. Isabella sank into a chair, covering her face. She never trusted anyone, Isabella whispered, not even me. She had secrets locked away everywhere, hidden samples, coded journals. She loved her work more than she loved us. Poirot approached her gently. Mademoiselle, jealousy clouds your memories. Isabella looked up sharply. I am not jealous, I am angry. Poirot nodded, and anger too can lead a person down dangerous paths. She flinched as though struck. You think I killed her? I think, Poirot said softly, that you hide more than you reveal. Their conversation ended abruptly when Duval reappeared, breathless. Poirot, you must see this. He led them to the maid's quarters, where the door stood half open. The room was immaculate, as though its inhabitant were an extension of the order she tried to maintain in Elise's life. But the small writing desk had been left in disarray, a drawer half pulled out, and a sheet of paper peeking beneath it. Poirot retrieved it carefully. It was a fragment of a note, written in the same faintly disguised handwriting as the letter found earlier. She knows. We must act soon. Poirot's eyes narrowed. This was not sent to Elise. This was written by Madame Moreau. Isabella gasped. So she was plotting something. But Poirot held up a hand. Let us not leap to conclusions. Words taken alone are like scents without context. They may deceive. He examined the desk further, discovering a small brass key hidden beneath the inkwell. Its teeth were delicate, its metal worn. A key to what, I wonder? Poirot murmured. Duval searched the room and soon discovered a locked chest beneath the bed. The key fit perfectly. Inside were bundles of letters, sketches of perfume bottles, and a velvet pouch containing a broken vial identical to the one found earlier in the laboratory. Isabella clutched her throat. She kept evidence. Poirot shook his head. No. She preserved memories. This vial was a gift, perhaps from Elise herself. Broken accidentally, not maliciously, the residue is old. But at the bottom of the chest lay something far more significant. A journal, Elise Marveau's journal. Poirot opened it slowly. The most recent entry was chilling in its brevity. I cannot trust him. He grows desperate. Tonight, I confront him. The ink had smudged slightly, as though touched by a trembling hand. Poirot closed the journal with a soft exhale. She did not fear the maid, nor her niece. She feared a man, one who grows desperate when cornered. Isabella's eyes widened. Lucien. Duval echoed the name, but Poirot's expression remained unreadable. Perhaps, but desperation wears many faces. Before they could speculate further, a cry echoed from outside. Sharp, panicked, unmistakably human. Poirot hurried toward the courtyard, where Benoit the valet stood, pale as chalk, pointing toward the cypress grove. "Monsieur Poirot, there is someone lying there!" Poirot and Duval rushed forward, the shadows between the trees deepening with each step. As they reached the clearing, they found the figure slumped beside the roots of an ancient cypress. It was Madame Moreau, and she was unconscious, or dead. Poirot knelt, touching her wrist gently. "She breathes," he announced, though faintly. A small bottle lay beside her, uncorked, the liquid spilled into the grass. Duval cursed under his breath. Was she attempting suicide, or silenced? Poirot studied her face, her hands the bruising on her temple. "No," he said quietly. "This was neither despair nor accident. This was a warning." He stood slowly, gazing through the shadowed grove. Someone feared what she knew, and now, mes amis, the murderer grows bold. Chapter 5. The Secrets of the Broken Vial. The villa seemed to exhale dread as night fell upon Grasse, turning its manicured gardens into a landscape of silhouettes and murmuring foliage. Hercule Poirot waited in the grand salon, while Madame Moreau, barely conscious when found, had been placed under the care of a local doctor summoned by Inspector Duval. Moonlight poured through the tall windows in silver stripes, revealing the dust motes suspended in stillness. Poirot sat with his fingertips pressed together, reflecting on the curious chain of events unravelling before him. Madame Moreau's collapse was no random misfortune. It was an interruption, a deliberate silencing. Someone feared what she might reveal, and in their haste they had grown reckless. Poirot's gaze drifted to a decanter of cognac on the side table. The surface of the liquid trembled faintly, though no breeze crossed the room. It was the trembling of a household trying desperately to conceal panic. Benoit appeared silently in the doorway, his expression strained. "Monsieur Poirot, the doctor says Madame Moreau will recover, but she remains weak." Poirot nodded, his mind already racing ahead. "Bon, then she may yet speak." Before questioning the maid, Poirot first sought to re-examine the laboratory under the strict isolation of night. There was something about the broken vial, the residue, and Elise's journal entry that whispered a deeper connection, one that daylight distractions had obscured. The laboratory glowed faintly under the soft lantern Benoit carried, every bottle casting elongated shadows. Poirot dismissed the valet gently and began his meticulous inspection. He started with the perfume organ, scanning each bottle not by sight but by intuition. His fingers brushed labels, but it was his nose that guided him. Each scent told its own story: rose de mai, ambergris, vetiver, but one vial remained oddly unscented, as though wiped clean. He lifted it delicately. The faintest ghost of a sharp, acrid aroma lingered. Poison! Yet this vial bore Elisa's label, Musique d'Or. A fragrance meant to evoke warmth, Poirot murmured, but someone altered it to deliver death. The killer had relied on the victim's certainty that her own ingredients were safe. Poirot's eyes drifted to the wooden workbench, where a thin scratch gleamed beneath the lantern's glow. He leaned closer. It was the same shape and angle as the second scratch he had observed earlier. A pear, not accidental, but the mark of habit. Someone who often opened bottles with impatient or forceful fingers. Elise Marveaux had been precise to the point of obsession. Her tools never bore such reckless signs. Yet another had used this bench recently. Poirot held the lantern closer to the edge, where he discovered a tiny bead of crystalline powder. He touched it lightly and brought the scent to his nose. "Not oleander," he whispered, "but something rarer, something only a chemist with ambition and arrogance would dare use." Lucien Delacroix's shadow lengthened in Poirot's thoughts. But suspicion was not yet proof. Poirot turned to leave when his foot brushed against something small and metallic. He knelt, retrieving a gold cufflink with an engraved initial. L. It gleamed innocently, yet it was damning. Someone had been careless in their intrusion. But Poirot tucked it gently into his pocket. "A clue too convenient," he murmured, "and when clues are too convenient, they are often meant to mislead." Returning to the salon, Poirot found Inspector Duval pacing before the fireplace. The doctor had departed, leaving Madame Moreau resting under watch in her room. "Poirot," Duval said grimly, "someone struck her from behind, a blunt object. She did not faint, she was attacked." Poirot nodded. "Oui, and the purpose was not murder, but delay." Isabella, who had drifted into the room with the restlessness of a trapped bird, gasped, "Delay! Why delay?" Poirot turned to her. "Because timing, mademoiselle, is everything. The murderer requires chaos and confusion, tools that benefit the guilty more than the innocent. If Madame Moreau regained her senses too soon, she might reveal something critical." Isabella's breath trembled. "You think she knows who killed my aunt?" Poirot fixed her with a gentle but unwavering gaze. "Not who, perhaps, but what? The smallest detail, a phrase overheard, a scent on clothing, a quarrel at the wrong moment." Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, visibly shaken. "I saw her arguing with Lucien 2 nights ago," she confessed suddenly. "In the courtyard. She looked frightened." Duval seized on the detail. "About what?" Isabella hesitated. "I don't know. I only caught the end. She said something like, 'I won't let you destroy her gifts.'" Lucien didn't see me. As if summoned by name, Lucien Delacroix strode into the room, fury etched into every line of his features. "I have had enough of your insinuations," he barked. "Your people invade my property, accuse me baselessly." Poirot raised a calm hand. "Monsieur, we accuse no one without reason. But someone has attacked Madame Moreau. Perhaps you can explain your whereabouts." Lucien's nostrils flared. "I was at the hotel reviewing financial statements." Poirot tilted his head. "Alone?" Lucien sputtered. "Yes. Am I forbidden to conduct business?" Poirot stepped closer. "Even business that profits from the death of Madame Marveau." Lucien froze, then lunged forward, but Duval intercepted him. "Enough!" the inspector growled. "You will remain available for questioning." Lucien stormed out, leaving behind the fragrance of anger and something darker. Fear. Poirot spent the next hour in quiet reflection, wandering through Elise's sitting room, touching her notebooks, her brushes, her carefully arranged collections of rare botanicals. Every element told a story of discipline and passion, yet also of isolation. She had trusted very few, and those she trusted might not have deserved it. He paused at the window overlooking the moonlit gardens. Somewhere out there, in the shadows, the murderer waited, confident still. But confidence was a fragile thing. He was about to step away when he noticed something new, a single piece of parchment tucked behind a vase. He retrieved it carefully. It was a torn page from Elise's journal. The inked words chilled him. "If he alters the formula again, I must expose him. It has gone too far." Poirot stared at the line for a long moment. "Not jealousy, not revenge," he murmured. "Sabotage." Someone had been tampering with Elise's work long before her death, and she had been preparing to confront him. Before he could continue his reasoning, Benoit rushed into the room, his face ashen. "Monsieur Poirot, Madame Moreau has awakened. She wishes to speak with you at once." Poirot rose immediately, feeling the shift in the air, a subtle tightening of the threads of truth. "Come, Benoit," he said softly. "The time for shadows ends. The time for clarity begins." And as he followed the valet down the dim corridor, Poirot felt the unmistakable sensation of the puzzle aligning, the sense of deceit, ambition, and fear blending into one undeniable conclusion, one step closer to revealing the perfumer's poisoner. Chapter 6. The Whispering Vats. The perfumery's inner workshop was unusually still when Poirot entered that evening, accompanied only by the faint hum of cooling machinery and the metallic tick of pipes contracting in the night air. Outside, Grasse glittered with distant lamps, but inside Maison Verdoux, shadows clung to the large copper distillation vats like living things. Poirot paused at the threshold, allowing his keen senses, scent, sound, spatial perception, to absorb the room in a single sweep. "Là! Voilà! The factory breathes secrets," he murmured, running a gloved hand along the cool rail. The place held the odour of roses, citrus, sandalwood, and something faintly chemical, sharp, almost medicinal. A scent he had noticed before, but could not yet classify. He was joined by Inspector Beaumont, who approached with his notebook already in hand. "I still find it odd, Monsieur Poirot, that you wish to revisit the workshop at night. Most clues are found in daylight." Poirot smiled gently. "That is where you are mistaken, mon ami. The night reveals what the day conceals. Factories rest when workers depart, and when a thing rests it betrays its imperfections." He gestured toward the vats. "Like a machine that murmurs differently with no human activity to drown it." As they advanced deeper into the workshop, the steel platforms above them groaned slightly, responding to a draught. Poirot tilted his head. "You hear that? That sound was not present earlier." Beaumont stiffened. "The catwalk?" "Non," Poirot replied softly. "Not the metal, the air. A current, a stream, as though a vent somewhere has been opened." They followed the faint whisper, the sound soft as breath. Poirot's cane tapped lightly as he walked, until he halted near vat number 7. The very vat under which the first trace of poisoned jasmine concentrate had been found. He leaned closer, inhaling carefully. A soft hiss drifted from the shadows behind the massive vat. Poirot knelt slowly, adjusting his position like a man aligning himself for a game of marbles. His fingers brushed lightly against the back of a metal panel. Cool, smooth, recently moved. "Inspector, if you would be so kind as to bring me the small flashlight." Beaumont obeyed, and in the glow of the narrow beam, a small ventilation grate behind the vat revealed itself, its screws imperfectly tightened, as though someone had replaced it in haste. Poirot touched one gently. It wobbled beneath his fingertip. "Behold, Beaumont, the passage of a secret." "Someone went behind the vats?" Beaumont asked. "For what purpose?" Poirot's brows lifted. "To hide something, or to access something they wished no one else to see." His hand traced the outline. "But more intriguing is the scent. It is faint, but unmistakable. Not jasmine, not rose. Something far more dangerous." Beaumont inhaled, then grimaced. "Acetone? Ether? No," Poirot whispered. "This is bitter almond." The inspector's eyes widened. "Cyanide." Poirot only tapped the grate thoughtfully. "A variant, one used in perfumery laboratories, It can alter chemical compositions drastically." He moved back with feline precision. "This confirms that the poison did not reach Jacqueline Verdoux by accident. Someone manipulated the fragrance formula from within this workshop." They circled the room, Poirot pausing occasionally to examine scuff marks on the floor, drips of resin, or subtle inconsistencies in the shelving arrangement. Everything, to Poirot, was a potential confession. The lights flickered faintly above them, and Beaumont glanced up uneasily. Poirot noticed the direction of his gaze. "You are nervous, mon ami." "Not nervous," Beaumont insisted, "but this place feels watched." Poirot stopped abruptly. "Good, then your instincts improve." At that moment, a soft clink echoed from the mezzanine walkway, a small object striking metal. Beaumont stepped back. "There! Someone is up there!" Poirot raised a hand. "No sudden moves. Whoever remains may flee, or worse, push something down onto us." He scanned the catwalk. Only darkness met them, but Poirot's eyes narrowed at a faint glimmer, light reflecting off glass. They climbed the metal stairs cautiously. At the top, Poirot found the source, a small vial resting precariously near the edge of the railing. It had rolled and struck the metal when the draft hit it. Beaumont frowned. "A vial of jasmine infusion. Why leave it here?" Poirot lifted it, holding it to the light. Inside, the liquid shimmered with an odd opacity. "Because," Poirot whispered, "this is not jasmine infusion. Observe the thickness. Jasmine is light, translucent. This is heavy clouded, a counterfeit." Beaumont blinked. "A fake batch." Poirot nodded. "A decoy created to mislead investigators. The murderer anticipated inspection and left this as a false trail." He examined the stopper. "More importantly, see the residue along the rim, crystalline, granular. This suggests mixing occurred hastily without proper cleansing." Beaumont leaned closer. "But who could have done it? The workers swear they never accessed this level." Poirot stepped back, gaze settling on a stack of fabric-covered crates. "Not the workers," he murmured, "but someone with authority to roam freely. Someone who understood both perfumery chemistry and the factory layout." He brushed his hand against the dust on the crate tops, noticing a disturbance, a circular indentation where something had recently been set. "A device was placed here," Poirot said softly. "Perhaps a timer. Perhaps something meant to release vapors during distillation." "You think the murder weapon was airborne?" Beaumont asked. Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the rail again, looking over the entire workshop floor as though viewing a giant chessboard. "The poison reached Jacqueline during the blending demonstration," he mused. "Not through her drink, not through food." He turned slowly toward the vat below them, vat number 7. "She inhaled it," Beaumont paled, "from the fragrance mixture." "From the environment," Poirot corrected. "A clever killer indeed. The air carries no fingerprints." Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from below, and both men spun. A tool had fallen near the entrance. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Someone had been here. Recently. Perhaps still was. Beaumont rushed ahead, but Poirot stopped him with a firm hand. "No! The killer has revealed enough for tonight. They wish us to chase shadows." Poirot descended the stairs, his expression drawn not with fear, but with growing certainty. "We have learned something vital, Inspector. The murderer is not improvising. They are orchestrating." He tapped his temple. "Each clue left is not merely to mislead, it is to measure my pace. They watch me. They test me." Beaumont shivered. "And what do we do?" Poirot reached the doorway, his gaze sweeping the dark corners once more. "We accelerate the game." He paused, listening again to the faint whisper from the vent. The sound was almost like breathing, steady, rhythmic, Poirot's voice lowered to a chilling softness. For now, we leave the factory. But tomorrow, mon ami, the killer shall find that Hercule Poirot has begun to see the invisible. And with that, the chapter closed in silence, the kind that hangs just before a storm breaks. Chapter 7. The Circle of Suspects. The morning sun filtered through the stained-glass windows of Villa Verdú, casting fractured beams of amber and gold across the drawing-room where Poirot had gathered the principal suspects. The room, fragrant with lavender sachets placed discreetly in corners, bore the weight of an unspoken tension. A tension that thickened as each person entered and found their designated seat. Poirot stood near the marble fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, observing their expressions with the calm scrutiny of a chess master contemplating the next move. His moustache twitched ever so slightly as he surveyed them. Etienne Morel, the perfumer whose ambition was whispered to be boundless. Colette Duval, the loyal but enigmatic assistant. Marc Verdoux, the grieving widower hiding storms behind civility. And Élise Garnier, Jacqueline's estranged cousin, whose sudden arrival in Grasse coincided suspiciously with the death. Poirot began with a gentle clearing of his throat. Mes amis, we are gathered to clarify the fog surrounding the tragic death of Madame Jacqueline Verdoux. Each of you holds a fragment of the truth, and Hercule Poirot always collects fragments. He tapped his temple softly. It is the method. Etienne Morel leaned back, arms crossed. Tightly, his jaw clenched as though bracing for confrontation. I came because I respect the investigation, Monsieur Poirot, he muttered, but I resent being treated like a criminal. Jacqueline was my colleague. Poirot gave a small, polite nod. And yet, Monsieur Morel, your name appears in more than one conversation describing, shall we say, professional rivalry. Etienne's shoulders stiffened, but Poirot did not press the remark further. He had already achieved the reaction he sought. Colette Duval sat upright, hands folded neatly in her lap, her dark eyes revealing a mix of anxiety and analytic sharpness. Poirot regarded her for a moment, noting the faint smudge of oil under her nail, perhaps from the workshop. Mademoiselle Duval, he said softly, you were the last to see Madame Verdoux alive before the demonstration began. You handed her the vial of jasmine infusion, did you not? She hesitated before answering. Yes, but I only handed what she asked for. She trusted me. I would never harm her. Marc Verdoux, who had been silent until now, exhaled heavily. His grief-worn face bore a strain that bordered on irritation. Monsieur Poirot, forgive me, but must this interrogation be so public? My wife is barely buried. Poirot's gaze softened. Monsieur Verdoux, I appreciate your pain. But I assure you, this gathering is essential. The killer is among those who had motive, opportunity, and knowledge of the perfumery processes. That includes each person here. Marc looked away, jaw trembling ever so slightly, a sign Poirot did not miss. Élise Garnier, sitting near the window, tapped a fingernail against the armrest. She had arrived in Grasse under the guise of reconciliation with her cousin. Though rumours suggested the Verdoux family inheritance fueled her sudden interest. Her gaze was sharp, her manner oddly defensive. Are we suspects merely because we exist in Jacqueline's orbit, Monsieur Poirot? That is absurd. Poirot stepped forward, hands clasped. Mademoiselle Garnier, in murders of passion and precision, proximity is never absurd. The air shifted with discomfort. Poirot allowed the tension to settle before moving on. He circled the chairs slowly, speaking with refined precision. Let us consider Madame Verdoux's final hours. She attended the blending demonstration. She inhaled fumes from a formula that should have been harmless, yet a toxin was present. This toxin required specialized knowledge to administer, a poison that disperses through the atmosphere, activated when heated. Etienne swallowed visibly. Are you suggesting one of us tampered with the formula? This is madness. Poirot raised a finger. Not madness, logic. The poison was introduced into the vat via a concealed opening, a vent not easily accessed without intimate knowledge of the factory layout. This was not a crime of passion, but of calculation. Beaumont, standing quietly beside the doorway, took furious notes. Poirot continued with calm authority, turning toward Marc Verdoux. Monsieur Verdoux, the factory is yours, yet you claim no one has unauthorized access. Marc stiffened. Correct. Only senior staff have full access. Poirot nodded slowly. How fortunate, then, that every person in this room qualifies as such. The silence grew thick. A clock ticked loudly, punctuating the unease. Poirot returned to Etienne Morel. Monsieur Morel, your file indicates a history of professional disagreements with Jacqueline. She rejected several of your proposed fragrance lines. Etienne's face flushed red. That is hardly motive for murder. Perhaps not murder, Poirot conceded, but sabotage? That is another matter. He pivoted to Colette. Mademoiselle Duval, you have worked at Maison Verdoux for 6 years. You know every vent, valve, and tool. Colette's fingers twitched. Poirot's voice softened. You were also Jacqueline's closest confidant. You knew her fears and her secrets. Colette's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Elise Garnier, meanwhile, made a soft, scoffing sound. Poirot turned to her at once. You, mademoiselle, disappeared from Jacqueline's life after a quarrel related to the family estate. Elise lifted her chin defiantly. That was years ago. But money, Poirot said gently, has a long memory. A tremor of annoyance rippled through her expression. Poirot then resumed his place beside the fireplace, resting one hand on the mantel. Mes amis, I will be frank. The murderer has made a grave miscalculation. They believe themselves invisible, hidden behind misdirection. But already the truth reveals itself. Beaumont leaned forward. What truth, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot smiled faintly. That the killer is not impulsive. They orchestrated every step. They planted false vials, tampered with vents, manipulated workshop access, and anticipated the actions of investigators. This is not the work of someone panicking. This is the work of someone confident. Etienne muttered, a madman. Poirot shook his head. No, monsieur, a strategist. His eyes swept once more across the suspects, lingering on each face long enough to unsettle, but not enough to betray suspicion. He wanted their nerves exposed, their facades cracking. Slowly, he said, a person capable of such planning would also be capable of controlling their emotions here. They would sit among us now, calm, watching, calculating every reaction. Each suspect shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room. Poirot clasped his hands again. And thus, I propose something simple. I ask each of you to remain available for further questioning. None must leave Grasse. Etienne exhaled sharply. Colette nodded shakily. Marc slumped back, drained. Elise narrowed her eyes. Poirot stepped back, his silhouette framed by the warm glow of the stained glass. The circle closes, mes amis, and soon the final truth shall bloom like the rarest of flowers. A tense silence filled the room, heavy with unsaid fears. Poirot smiled gently, but behind the softness lay an iron certainty. Chapter by chapter, he murmured to himself, the murderer reveals themselves. Chapter 8. The Scent of Betrayal. The evening wind wound its way through the narrow stone streets of Grasse as Poirot returned to the Verdoux estate, his polished shoes tapping softly against the cobblestones. Lanterns glimmered like watchful eyes, flickering with the same quiet uncertainty that filled his thoughts. The day's confrontations had been fruitful, but not in the obvious sense. Poirot had not expected confessions. What he had sought instead were the delicate shifts, the glance too sharp, the denial too swift, the tremor too well-timed. These subtle notes, like hidden accords in a perfume, were beginning to blend into a dangerous scent. Betrayal. Inside the estate, the corridors felt unusually quiet. A servant informed Poirot that Monsieur Verdoux was resting in his private study, while the others had returned to their lodgings. Poirot requested a moment alone in Jacqueline's laboratory, the sanctuary where she had spent her final days crafting what she hoped would be her masterpiece. The room was as she had left it, glass bottles neatly arranged, her silver distillation tools polished to a shine, and a long oak table covered with handwritten notes, uncapped ink pots, and hand-blown vials in varying hues. Poirot inhaled softly, letting the scents travel through memory rather than curiosity. "A fragrance," he murmured, "reveals the truth of its creator." He walked slowly toward the central table, noting the scattered papers Jacqueline had annotated. Her handwriting, precise, artistic, held margins filled with personal thoughts, concerns about Etienne's ambition, sadness about Elise's sudden return, and a cryptic remark about Marc. "He grows distant. A shadow follows him." Poirot paused on that line, his gaze narrowing slightly. A wife often sees what others do not. He sifted through more pages until he found a formula labelled Horizon d'Or, version finale. This was her prized fragrance, the masterpiece she believed would define the Verdoux legacy. But beneath the formula, Poirot noticed a second page tucked almost invisibly beneath the blotter. He extracted it gently. The handwriting here was different, more hurried, uneven. "Someone is tampering with the vats. I fear sabotage. Must speak to M." Poirot's brow arched. "M," he whispered. "Marc, Morel, Mademoiselle Duval's former mentor." Each possibility opened a different door. He folded the page neatly into his pocket before continuing his search. A small brass key lay beside a stack of blotting cloths. Poirot picked it up, its surface warm from the day. "A key," he said softly, "is never without a lock." On a whim, he checked the key drawers beneath Jacqueline's working counter. Most opened freely, but one remained stubborn. He inserted the brass key, and with a soft click, the drawer slid open. Inside were 3 items: a velvet pouch containing crushed amber resin, a sealed envelope addressed to in case of danger, and a broken vial, its glass edges faintly tinged with a residue. Poirot held the vial under the light. Mon Dieu! The residue shared the same faint almond note he had identified near the workshop vent. Jacqueline had discovered the poison before her death. She had tried to hide evidence, or worse, she had feared someone close. Poirot opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single page, her handwriting elegant but strained. "If anything happens, it will come from someone I trusted, someone inside this family or this house." Poirot exhaled slowly. A betrayal, not from an enemy, but a confidant. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Poirot turned sharply as the door creaked open. Marc Verdoux entered, his expression pale and drawn. "Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly, "I thought I would find you here." Poirot nodded. "Oui, Monsieur Verdoux, I seek clarity, and your late wife's laboratory offers many truths." Marc stepped further inside, eyes drifting over the table as though it still belonged to his wife. "I have not entered this room since her death," he murmured. "It feels intrusive." Poirot observed him carefully. "And yet you come now." Marc offered a tired smile. "You gather us all as suspects. I wish to see with my own eyes the place where she spent her last hours." Poirot moved closer, a soft gentleness in his manner. "Monsieur Verdoux, your wife believed herself in danger." Mark's head snapped up. "What?" Poirot handed him the note. "Someone is tampering with the vats. Must speak to M." Mark's face drained of colour. She meant me? Perhaps," Poirot replied. "Or perhaps another whose name begins with M." Mark gripped the edge of the table, his breath uneven. "I swear to you, Poirot, I loved Jacqueline. Yes, we had tensions, who does not? But I would never harm her, never." Poirot studied him quietly. "And yet you entrusted significant authority in the factory to Morel, a man your wife feared." Mark swallowed. She believed Etienne wanted control of the Verdoux line. Perhaps she was right, but Etienne would never sabotage an entire formula. His pride would not allow such recklessness. Poirot responded softly. "Ambition blinds even the cleverest." Mark looked away, eyes clouded. "Poirot, if she feared me, then she never told me. I do not understand." Poirot rested a hand gently on the table. "Grief clouds reason, Monsieur Verdoux, but truth does not vanish." He glanced toward the broken vial. "This evidence suggests Jacqueline discovered the poison. She died because she was close to exposing someone." Mark's voice cracked. "Who?" Before Poirot could answer, a distant crash reverberated through the villa, something shattering against the marble foyer. Both men turned sharply. Poirot's posture straightened instantly. "That," he said, "was not the wind." They rushed into the hallway. The air was filled with the faint scent of crushed orchids. Someone had broken a vase. But the deeper, more troubling scent was something sharper. A warning, footsteps, hurried light echoed toward the rear exit. Poirot chased the sound with surprising swiftness for his age, Mark following close behind. By the time they reached the courtyard, the gate swung slightly in the breeze. Someone had just slipped away. Poirot stepped out into the garden, his keen eyes following the disturbance in the gravel path, the hurried footprints, the slight drag of a heel, the broken stem of a rosebush brushed in haste. The night air tasted of tension. Mark panted behind him. "Who was it? One of the staff?" Poirot shook his head. "No. This was someone familiar with the villa layout, someone who feared what I had just discovered." Mark's voice trembled. "You think it was one of them?" Poirot turned slowly, his expression grave but focused. "Monsieur Verdoux, the scent of betrayal grows stronger. And now the killer begins to panic." The garden fell silent around them, ominous, waiting. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to echo through the darkness. "Tomorrow, the hidden truth shall rise, and the murderer will make their most dangerous move yet." Chapter 9. The Fractured Alibi. A muted gloom hung over Grasse the following morning, as though the sky itself had become an accomplice to the secrets lurking within the Verdoux affair. Poirot stood at the wrought-iron balcony of his hotel suite, observing the mist rolling down from the surrounding hills. The fragrance capital of the world seemed strangely subdued, its perfumes unable to mask the deeper odour of fear. Poirot sipped his steaming tisane, mind sifting through the events of the previous night. The shattered vase, the fleeing intruder, the broken vial revealing Jacqueline's desperate warning. All threads spiraled toward the same knot. Someone close, someone trusted, was cornered, and cornered criminals were dangerous indeed. He arrived at Maison Verdoux shortly after 9. Inspector Beaumont, already pacing the foyer like an anxious hound, hurried toward him. "Monsieur Poirot, there's been an incident at the factory." Poirot raised a calm brow. "An incident? But of course there has. When the murderer realizes their plan unravels, panic leads to carelessness. Beaumont exhaled sharply. A small fire broke out in vat room B, contained quickly, but the cause appears deliberate. Poirot straightened, his eyes sharpening. Sabotage to destroy evidence. The killer seeks to erase their steps. Together they marched through the factory's stone corridors until they reached the charred remnants of the accident. Burned cloth, blackened floor tiles, and a twisted metal vent partially melted from the heat. Poirot knelt beside the damaged vent. "Ah," he murmured, "our elusive vent returns. The killer wishes to destroy the pathway through which they administered the poison." Beaumont crouched beside him. "Someone tried to burn it out." Poirot traced a finger along the melted edge. "Yes, but see here. The fire was lit in haste and extinguished even faster. The culprit was interrupted." Beaumont's eyes widened. "You mean they were here recently?" Poirot nodded. "Very." As they examined the room further, Poirot discovered a small scrap of fabric snagged on a protruding nail near the doorframe. He lifted it delicately. A fragment of dark blue silk, luxurious, foreign, expensive. Not from the factory uniforms, he noted, and not coarse enough to belong to a labourer. Beaumont blinked. From one of the suspects, then. Poirot wrapped the silk in a handkerchief. Indeed, someone who wears elegance as easily as deceit. Leaving the ruined room behind, Poirot insisted they gather the suspects once more, this time inside Marc Verdoux's study. The setting was intimate, the walls lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and the air perfumed by cedarwood polish and old paper. Marc arrived looking strained, while Etienne Morel appeared quietly defiant, his attire immaculate, but his eyes restless. Colette Duval entered last, trembling slightly, her blouse creased as though hastily thrown on. Poirot stood before them, holding the blue silk fragment like a verdict. "Mes amis," he began smoothly, "someone attempted to destroy vital evidence this morning. Someone who fears discovery." Etienne scoffed. "Again you gather us as though we are children in scolding." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not children, Monsieur Morel. Players in a most deadly drama." He approached Etienne first. "Monsieur Morel, your alibi for last night?" Etienne crossed his arms. "I was home, alone. Convenient," Poirot murmured. "And this morning? I arrived at the factory after the fire was already extinguished. Ask the workers." Poirot's gaze lingered on the man's pristine jacket, far too neat for a morning of chaos. But the silk fragment? No. Etienne preferred wool, monotone, professional. Poirot turned to Colette. "Mademoiselle Duval, where were you last night at the time of the disturbance at the Verdoux villa?" Colette hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously. I was at my boarding house. Poirot stepped closer. "Your blouse is torn at the shoulder," he observed softly. "A tear consistent with snagging on a sharp object, like a nail in a doorframe." Colette's eyes widened. I don't know when that happened." Poirot held her gaze gently but firmly. "Do not fear, mademoiselle. If you are innocent, the truth will shield you." Colette's breathing quickened. I heard something last night," she stammered. "I was walking back to the villa. I thought maybe I could speak to Monsieur Verdoux about Jacqueline's notes. I saw a figure running through the courtyard, but I couldn't see who." Poirot frowned. "Why come to the villa so late?" Colette bit her lip. "Because I found something earlier in Jacqueline's locker. A second key to Varum B. I didn't want the others to know." Poirot absorbed this carefully. "A brave choice," he whispered. "But her clothing, her posture, yes, her tear was real. but one could tear fabric without being guilty. He turned at last to Elise Garnier, who sat elegantly in a corner chair, legs crossed, eyes narrowed with annoyance. She had not spoken yet. Now Poirot addressed her directly. "Mademoiselle Garnier, your attire today is interesting." She lifted her chin. "Is that a crime, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot raised the silk scrap. "This matches the lining of your jacket." Elise froze, her lips parting ever so slightly. "That is impossible." Poirot stepped closer. "Is it? You were at the villa last night. You fled through the courtyard. The vase, your doing. You sought something in Jacqueline's laboratory, and when you heard Mark and I approaching, you panicked." Mark turned toward Elise, shocked. "Elise, why were you in Jacqueline's lab?" Elise's mask cracked, just for a breath's length. A small tremor of fear passed through her carefully crafted composure. "I went there only to recover letters Jacqueline wrote to me long ago," she said hurriedly. "Letters that might be misinterpreted." Poirot studied her face. "And this morning's fire, also an attempt to retrieve something?" "I don't know anything about a fire," Elise snapped. "You cannot accuse me without proof." Poirot's voice softened dangerously. "But I do have proof. You were informed of Jacqueline's concerns about a saboteur. You returned to Grasse suddenly, and Jacqueline wrote a note naming only one person with a single initial AMB. You feared being implicated. That fear drove you to destroy potential evidence." Elise stood abruptly, but Poirot lifted a hand. "Yet," he continued calmly, "you are not the murderer." The room fell silent. Even Elise blinked, stunned. I am not." Poirot shook his head. "No, mademoiselle, you are panicked, guilty of trespass perhaps, but not capable of such scientific sabotage. You are impulsive. Our killer is not." Etienne stepped forward. "Then who—" Poirot looked around slowly, allowing the weight of his next words to sink deep into the air. "The killer's identity is now almost clear. They tried to burn the vent. They watched Jacqueline die. They returned to destroy the evidence." He paused for dramatic effect. "And they will strike again, very soon." A tremor passed through the room. Colette, Etienne gasped softly. Mark clenched his fists. Elise sank back into her chair, bewildered. Poirot glanced toward the window, where the mist outside began to lift like a curtain preparing for the final act. "Tonight," he said quietly, "the truth shall step forward." Chapter 10. The perfumer's confession night had settled like a velvet curtain over Grasse. The perfumeries shuttered and streets nearly deserted, save for the occasional lantern flickering in the mist. Inside Maison Verdoux, however, tension crackled through every corridor. Poirot had summoned all principal players to the grand drawing-room, a room now saturated with the scent of lavender cedar and a faint trace of jasmine that clung stubbornly in the corners. The suspects entered in silence, each aware that this gathering was different from the previous ones. There would be no false reassurances tonight. Tonight, the truth would reveal itself. Poirot stood in the centre, his small frame commanding the room with an authority that was both gentle and absolute. His hands rested lightly on the mantelpiece as he regarded each individual carefully, noting the subtle tremor in Colette Duval's fingers, the carefully concealed anxiety behind Marc Verdoux's eyes, the rigid posture of Etienne Morel, and the barely concealed tension in Elise Garnier. He inhaled softly, savouring the subtle bouquet of human emotion mingled with lingering fragrance. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice calm but weighted, "we have traced the steps of the unfortunate poisoning that claimed Madame Jacqueline Verdoux. We have examined her laboratory, her notes, the vats of the perfumery, and even the minute traces left by our perpetrator. And we have found our path, illuminated not by accident, but by the very errors of the criminal themselves. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle like a fine powder in the air. You will recall the broken vial, the residue of bitter almonds, the disturbance in the vents, the hastily extinguished fire. Each is a breadcrumb, leading inexorably to the one responsible. Etienne shifted uncomfortably. You cannot seriously imply— Poirot raised a hand, halting him. I imply nothing, monsieur. I observe, I analyze, and I reveal. And now, the final observation. The perpetrator is not motivated merely by greed, nor by passion, nor by impulsive malice. They are driven by an obsession with control, over fragrance, over power, over those who work with them. His gaze swept the room slowly, deliberately, until it rested upon a figure who had until now remained quiet, Colette Duval. Colette's eyes widened, but she did not speak. Poirot moved closer. Mademoiselle Duval, you are precise, careful, and devoted to your work. You have knowledge of every vent, every vat, every vial. You know the consequences of a single error in chemical combination. And yet, when Jacqueline uncovered a contamination in Horizon Door, you saw not only an opportunity, but a necessity to remove the obstacle to your influence within the Verdú perfumery. Colette's lips trembled. I didn't— Poirot's eyes softened, though their intensity did not waver. You panicked. You did not intend to murder, but your actions caused it. You tampered with the fragrance, hoping only to delay Madame Verdú's inspection, to prevent her discovery of a minor sabotage you had engineered in ambition and fear. He stepped aside, indicating the evidence laid out on the table. The broken vial, the residue, the fragments of silk, the note Jacqueline had left hidden. Every act you took, mademoiselle, every misstep, was catalogued in your panic. The broken vent, the hastily placed false vials, the fleeing in the night, even the small fire in vat room B, all betray an effort to erase your presence. Marc Verdú's face paled. Colette, you? But why? Colette's hands covered her face, her voice barely a whisper. I wanted to protect the formulas. I thought if she found the errors I made, she would fire me. I didn't mean to. Poirot nodded gently. Intent and consequence are often separate in the world of crime, mademoiselle. You panicked and acted rashly, and the result was fatal. But now the truth stands free, and justice may follow its course. Etienne Morel, still rigid with disbelief, spoke with a tremor. So all my fears about sabotage were correct, but I— Poirot interjected softly. Yes, Monsieur Morel, your suspicions were accurate, though the culprit was not you. Observation alone does not implicate only reasoning. And now that reasoning reveals our culprit— Elise Garnier exhaled slowly, leaning back. And what of me? Am I no longer suspect? Your intrusion, mademoiselle, was motivated by curiosity and panic, not malice. You acted hastily, yes, but without intent to poison. It is Colette's fear that catalyzed the tragedy, not your desire to retrieve letters or to uncover secrets. Poirot's eyes swept the room, landing briefly on each face as if sealing the revelation in memory. Now the matter must be addressed with care, legally and humanely. But for us, for understanding, the mystery concludes. Colette lowered her hands, shaking, tears glistening in her eyes. I will go with the authorities. I never meant— Her voice broke, but Poirot simply nodded. Compassion, he believed, was part of the detective's duty. To understand the human heart was as crucial as to uncover the crime itself. Marc Verdú moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on Colette's shoulder. It is over, he whispered. Jacqueline would want this truth known. Poirot took a step back and inhaled deeply. the mingling scents of cedar, lavender, and faint jasmine wrapping the room in a surreal calm. "Indeed," he said softly, "over for now, but the lessons remain. Human ambition, fear, and passion are as potent and volatile as the rarest essences. They must be handled with care, or tragedy results." The room exhaled collectively. Relief, guilt, and shock intermingled. Poirot regarded each person once more, the faintest smile touching his lips. "And now, mes amis, life may resume. The Verdú perfumes will continue to enchant the world, as will the memory of Madame Jacqueline Verdú. But let all present here understand that the perfume of truth is strongest when carefully distilled, and its scent never forgotten." As he turned toward the window, the night outside seemed lighter, the mist lifting to reveal the quiet splendor of Grasse's perfumed hills. The stars above twinkled like distant lamps, witnesses to the revelation that had unfolded. Justice had been served, but more importantly, understanding had been reached. Colette would face the authorities, and the truth of the perfumer's poison would become a lesson woven into the legacy of Maison Verdú. Poirot exhaled and straightened, adjusting his cravat. "A case concluded," he murmured to himself, "not with brute force, but with reason, observation, and the small but indispensable brushstrokes of human nature. Ah, the human heart, so complex, so delicate, yet so revealing, when one only knows where to look." Outside, the wind carried the mingled scents of jasmine, rose, and the distant citrus groves. Inside, the drawing-room was silent, save for the gentle rustle of silk and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock marking the conclusion of a mystery, and the dawn of a lesson in the deadly allure of ambition.